At about the same time the Romans were conquering Britain, a small settlement of hunter-fisher Tequesta were set up on a tiny island in the Everglades. But what happened to their remains? And who has them now? What would become a small mound in the tiny town of Parkland, Florida. It took 2,000 years for their tiny settlement to be found. Before civilization came to drain the swamps and build the McMansions, the little island barely stood above the waters of the surrounding swamp. A tiny cluster of Tequesta natives called it home. Hunters and fishermen that made tools from the bones of fish, turtles, alligators, snakes, deer, raccoon, and otter. The Tequesta were part of the Glades culture and used canoes to paddle between the Everglades and the Atlantic Ocean. The little mound sat quietly while Europe discovered the continent. Through the Spanish, British, and United States ownership of the land, through the Civil War and 2 world wars, until South Florida's nice weather and booming economy started attracting people from all over the United States who came to Florida to live, work, and play in the same heat and sunshine that Tequesta had known. Although locals were aware of the site as early as 1940, it was Bruce Blount in 1959 who first discovered the skeletal remains when a bulldozer knocked open a wooden crypt full of human remains. Mr. Blount would found the town of Parkland and go on to be its first mayor. At that time, Parkland had not yet been founded, so they named the site after the nearby village of Margate and its discoverer, Mr. Blount. More time passed until the mid-1980s, when Coral Ridge Properties, developing the town of Parkland and Coral Springs, purchased this land to develop it. They hired Professor Wilburn Sonny Cockerell, who assessed the site and determined that it was settled sometime between 500 BC and 500 AD, but he allowed that it was possible that the range was wider by 1,000 years. Professor Cockerell stated that this site is regionally significant and probably would qualify to be put on the National Register of Historic Places. Sure enough, a survey in 2002 by Dr. Robert S. Carr led to the establishment of the site as a historic place in 2006, with the cooperation of Parkland, Broward County, and the state of Florida. From this site, we learn about the Tequesta and how they lived. This site contains both a settlement and a burial mound. There were shark vertebrae and teeth fashioned into tools such as knives and decorative pieces such as beads and pendants, suggesting trade with other areas. A rare turtle pendant was particularly significant. It's enough to make you wonder if they sat here under very similar trees listening to mockingbirds, just like I am. 10 years ago, Ken Cutler, a Coral Springs lawyer and a Parkland City Commissioner, reading an article written by Williams entitled "Bridge to the Past: Excavations at the Margate-Blount Site," became curious about where the human remains had gone. Where were the bones that had been disturbed by Mr. Blount and his bulldozer? Cutler found another article published the same year by Professor M. Yasar Iska at FAU, who described working on the human remains, which were acquired by Wilma Williams, and the 3 boxes of bones loaned to me by the museum in Fort Lauderdale. But there was no indication of the disposition of the bones. Where did they go after Professor Iska worked on them? Commissioner Cutler made it his mission to find these remains, following the bones from FAU to the now defunct Graves Museum and beyond. Since 1990, federal law has allowed for the repatriation of Native American remains to their original burial grounds. Thanks to documentation required by this law, Cutler learned that in 1959, 12 individuals were removed during the digging of a drainage canal at the Margate-Blount site. And the notice indicated that the human remains would transfer to the Seminole Indian tribe of South Florida. Cutler did his homework and found that the remains were indeed still at FAU, but were legally now under the control of the Seminole tribe of Florida. As a general rule, the Seminole do not discuss the transfer of their ancestors to burial grounds. They consider it a very private practice, and they don't talk about it with outsiders. But they did state that they intended to take the remains and reinter them here at the burial mound in Parkland. This would be done at a private ceremony to honor their ancestors. Writing in 2023, Cutler wrote, 60 years ago, remains of some of Parkland's ancestral residents were removed from their final resting place. Now, a mystery of what happened to those remains after 1983 has been solved. The remains will be cared for and reinterred respectfully by the Seminole descendants of their Tequesta ancestors. If you live in Parkland, Florida, or some of the nearby communities, come out here to the Margate-Blount Archaeological Site. Spend a half hour walking around. Try to picture the land surrounding the swamp, the tiny hill rising out of the water, and a community of natives going about their day. Maybe some of the first Floridians out here enjoying the sunshine and having tilapia for lunch.